你告诉他就毁了他美好的心情，你说对吧？
搭到他的肩膀上，那时候我都怀疑我又不在，他俩在卧室那干啥？
Audiences today are accustomed to watching genre films. Think action, horror, rom-com, etc. We see these movies because we know exactly what we're paying for, and that we'll get our money's worth, hopefully. But as you've probably noticed by now, this philosophy makes for boring movies. The characters all seem a little familiar, the plots all seem a little predictable, and there's almost too many MacGuffins to keep count. But every once in a while, a film comes along that seems to defy genre entirely. The Farewell is a beautiful film, and if you haven't seen it yet, you should go watch it ASAP. Something I love about this movie is just how often it surprised me. And like a true writing nerd, I sat in the audience trying to map out the plot structure. Now, if you've seen any blockbuster movie in the last decade, then you're familiar with some version of three-act structure or the hero's journey. If those terms don't mean anything to you, then here's a quick crash course. Three-act structure is one model writers use to organize their stories. Now, what exactly is it? Well, each act or chunk of story has a certain function in advancing our protagonist's growth. Act 1 is the setup. Act 2 is the struggle or confrontation. Finally, Act 3 is the resolution. With each act, we have key plot points, the first of which is called the inciting incident. This kicks the story world and our protagonist into gear. They'll then face a threshold, or a moment where they must fully commit to their new mission. After facing some initial obstacles, the protagonist takes on their biggest challenge yet, the midpoint. This event usually pushes the momentum of the story in the opposite direction, so if things have been going really well so far, then it's about to get tough for our hero, or vice versa. This next plot point goes by a lot of names, but I like to refer to it as the rededication. Though the stakes are higher than before, our character digs deeper than their self-doubt and recommits to the task at hand. Finally, we have the climax. This is the ultimate test for our protagonist, and depending on the message and tone of the story, they'll either win or lose, ultimately transforming into the person they were meant to be all along. Now, I mentioned genre before. I like to think of genre as the flavor of our story structure. Though sci-fis and comedies can both follow the three-act model, they both have unique variations on the recipe that set them apart from each other. One of the things that makes The Farewell so special is that it doesn't really abide by any of those pre-existing genre conventions.
You know, it's hard because people go, well, then what's the comp? And it's very difficult to give a comp for something that doesn't exist, but also it's necessary to tell new stories.
Instead, I think writer-director Lulu Wang had a different approach when adapting this story. By using something known as a dialectic style, Wang positions her characters so that the audience can explore one central idea, that the collective good could be more valuable than one individual's desire. Just a note, there will be some spoilers ahead since I want to talk about this film in its entirety. In literature and philosophy, a dialectic is a conversation between two or more perspectives, eventually leading to the creation of a new, unified perspective. This style resembles traditional three-act structure, only in the fact that it also has three main components. These are often referred to as the thesis, the antithesis, and synthesis. For example, if I say all superhero movies are bad, that would be a thesis. If you responded with an example of a critically acclaimed superhero movie, that would be an antithesis. If I then revised my statement to reflect this new perspective, i.e., there are some bad superhero movies, that would be synthesis. I think it's important to understand how this discourse works in order to grasp what makes Billy's journey in The Farewell so profound. Billy, played by rapper/actress Awkwafina, is our lens into the world of this story. She's young, first generation, and struggling to pay her rent. Chances are you can probably relate to one of those traits. If this film is a conversation between East and West, then her character definitely represents an assimilated Western perspective.
Awkwafina's character, Billy, as an American, she very much believes in truth and freedom as the most important values.
Early on in the film, Nai, Billy's grandmother, asks Billy if she's found someone yet. Billy responds by saying she's perfectly content doing her own thing. Not long after, we see she lives all by herself. At this point, it's pretty clear that this character is someone who values her independence. However, Billy's world is shaken up when her parents tell her that her grandmother is dying. They go on to tell Billy that they can't let Nai know, so they're staging a fake wedding in order to visit her one last time, and that she can't come with because she's too likely to expose the lie. But Billy disobeys their wishes and joins the family in China anyway, once again illustrating her non-conformist mindset. Despite promising to play along, she often clashes with the family, raising the dramatic question of the story.
Isn't it wrong to lie?
I think this is one of my favorite things about films with a strong ensemble cast, the way in which a myriad of different ideas can be represented on screen at once. Imagine a sliding scale. At one end of the spectrum, we have one belief. Keeping the truth from Nai is wrong, for example. On the other end, there's a different opinion. Under no circumstances can the family tell Nai the truth. If we were to map it out, you'd find the characters of this film placed at various points across that spectrum. What's even more interesting is that their positions shift and change over the course of the film. I think this diversity of voices represents a certain nuance that a lot of modern films lack. Now, for the majority of this film, Billy will find herself over here in this camp. Remember, it's her perspective and beliefs that represent the thesis of this film. On the flip side of this argument, you have Billy's family. They believe in certain traditions that Billy was never exposed to, since she moved to the States when she was very young. It's this schism that becomes a main point of conflict for the film.
因为你把生命看成是个体的，这正是西方和东方的文化差异问题。东方人是把生命看作是集体。
I think Billy's uncle perfectly articulates the film's antithesis with this line. A person's life is a part of a whole. This statement evokes the idea of collectivism, a predominant philosophy among Eastern cultures that emphasizes putting the group over the self. In stark contrast to Billy's isolated lifestyle, her family moves and acts like a collective. They eat every meal together, they all stay in the same hotel, and they sit together in the waiting room when the doctors run tests on Nai. They also collectively decide to bear the emotional weight of this diagnosis so that Nai can enjoy the time she has left. Billy's uncle is definitely on the opposite end of the scale, but also in the Don't Tell Nai camp. You'll find her younger sister, Little Nai. Later in the film, Little Nai reveals to Billy that her grandmother told a similar lie to her grandfather when he was sick. Learning that this is something her grandmother might want for herself is a big revelation to Billy and prompts a change in her perspective. In what you would traditionally call the climax of the film, this is where the two opposing perspectives start to blend into something more cohesive, something more closely resembling the truth. Synthesis. Finally, the fake wedding is here, and Billy is more dedicated than ever to upholding this lie. Her position along the scale has changed, but she's not the only one. Though early in the film her uncle emphasized the need for discretion, he can barely keep it together when giving a speech on stage. Just a few scenes prior, even Billy's father is questioning whether or not this ruse was worth it. However, Billy goes above and beyond to keep her promise, racing to the hospital in order to keep Nai from getting the results. Even when she and her grandmother are alone, Billy doesn't tell Nai about the diagnosis. She now realizes it was never her truth to tell, it was her family's. In the end, no one really kept their concern for Nai all that secret, and I think Nai also knew much more about her condition than she led everyone to believe. But what matters is that by taking on this responsibility, Billy and the others have made themselves more emotionally vulnerable, and as a result, have grown closer. Though she may have started this story as an individual, by the end, Billy's found a much more real identity through her family and through her culture. I'm running out of ways to say it, but this film really resonated with me. And it's not just me. This film hit home with a lot of people. It actually beat Endgame's per box office average by a little over $10,000 per theater. Beyond the film's universal themes, I think representation is a key to the farewell's success. Director Lulu Wang has talked about it multiple times in interviews, but she set out to create something she'd never seen on screen before, an honest depiction of her family's experience as Chinese immigrants. And though I think the numbers speak for themselves, I'll go out on a limb and say that that creation was a success. Let it be a lesson to Hollywood and audiences alike. Whether we want better movies or just better box office numbers, we have to start by supporting filmmakers telling their stories, not someone else's.